All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to tackle OfferUp.
Oh, yeah. OfferUp.
I think a lot of people, they think of it as a place to maybe, get rid of some stuff around the house and make a few extra bucks.
Right.
But there's actually a whole strategy to it. And we're gonna deep dive into that today.
Okay.
Our source material is an interesting chapter
Yes.
from the book 1,000 Ways to Hustle.
Okay.
And it had some really, really good stuff about not just how to use OfferUp, but how to use it really effectively, both buying and selling.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to go beyond just the basics, like snapping a quick picture. We're going to talk about, understanding how to make your listing stand out and how to think about negotiating to get the best prices.
Yeah, so it's like leveling up, taking your off-rate game to the next level. And one of the things that I found really interesting in the source material was they talk about the shipping option.
Oh, yes.
Which a lot of people might not even realize is a thing.
That's right, yeah.
And this opens up a whole other realm of possibility because now you're not just selling to your local area.
Exactly. You can reach a national audience.
Exactly. So you can really turn this into, a pretty significant side hustle, potentially even a full-time hustle.
Absolutely. The potential is there. Now, a lot of people might think, well, isn't OfferUp basically the same as like Craigslist?
Yeah.
But that's where things get interesting, right?
Yeah. And I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, are they really that different?
There are some key features that set OfferUp apart. One of the biggest ones is the emphasis on user profiles and ratings. So you have that social proof element, right?
Mm.
It's not just, an anonymous listing. You can see who you're dealing with, what kind of feedback they've gotten from other users, and that builds trust, encourages, good behavior on the platform.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've always said, like, reviews are so powerful.
Yeah.
Whether you're, shopping online, buying a product, or looking for a service. Reviews can make or break, your decision.
Absolutely. They give you that social proof. It's like having a friend vouch for, a particular seller or a particular product.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's talk about the listings themselves because, honestly, the photos, I think, are really make or break.
Yeah, visuals are huge.
Like, you could have the best description in the world.
Oh, yeah.
But if your photos are terrible, people are just going to scroll right past.
Absolutely. A picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Especially in the online marketplace. And our source material really emphasized natural light for photos.
Yes.
Try to, take your pictures outside if you can, or near a window where you're getting that beautiful natural light.
Now, what about like if you're selling something big, like a piece of furniture,
right?
You can't exactly move a sofa outside for a photo shoot.
True, that can be tricky. But even then, try to position the item near a window. Make the most of the natural light you have available. And for smaller items, a great tip from the source is to create a DIY light box.
Okay, a light box. What is that?
It's super simple. You just take a cardboard box.
Oh, okay.
Cut out some windows, and then cover those windows with tissue paper. That diffuses the light beautifully, gives you a nice, soft, even light. And you'd be surprised how professional even smartphone pictures can look with a DIY light box.
Well, okay, that's a clever hack.
Oh.
I'm going to have to try that. All right, so we've got the good lighting. What about making the listing itself stand out?
Right. Because you got to think, when someone's scrolling through OfferUp, they're bombarded with listings.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So you got to grab their attention,
right.
Make your listing pop.
So catchy title, detailed description. Are those the basics?
Those are the basics, but let's take it a step further. Don't just list features. You got to highlight benefits. Paint a picture with your words.
Oh, I like that.
Like, instead of just saying, this sofa is blue, you could say, imagine curling up on this cozy blue sofa with a good book and a cup of coffee.
Oh, yeah.
Bring in those sensory details. Make it feel personal.
Yeah. Make them feel like they're already there.
Exactly.
Enjoying the item.
Right. Make that emotional connection.
Okay, now let's talk pricing. Our source material mentioned a tactic called anchoring.
Anchoring, yes.
And it sounds a little manipulative, to be honest.
It can be, but it can also be a very effective psychological tool if you use it ethically. The basic idea is you start with a slightly higher asking price than you're actually willing to accept.
Okay.
So that way, when you come down to your actual desired price, it feels like a bargain to the buyer.
So it's all about perception.
Exactly. It's about framing the deal.
Okay. But how do you actually pull that off without seeming like shady?
Well, let's say you want to sell that sofa for $200. You could list it for, say, $250. And then if a buyer comes along and offers, say, $220, you can act like you're reluctantly coming down, making them feel like they've really scored.
Okay, so you're kind of playing a little bit of a game,
But a little bit.
but you're not being dishonest.
Right. You're not being dishonest.
You're just framing it in a way that's
Yeah.
more appealing to the buyer.
Exactly. You're just using a little bit of psychology. But you also have to be prepared to walk away if somebody offers you way below your bottom line.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Know your worth, right?
Yeah.
Know the value of what you're selling.
Absolutely. Know your bottom line. And speaking of expanding your reach and potentially increasing your profits, let's talk about OfferUp's shipping option. This is where things get really interesting for anyone looking to build a side hustle or even a full-time business.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've always been a little bit curious about that.
Yeah.
So let's say I have an item that I know I can ship. Does OfferUp handle everything? How does that actually work?
Not quite everything. So the way it works is the buyer pays for the shipping up front through the app. OfferUp provides you with a prepaid shipping label,
Oh,
and then you, as the seller, are responsible for packaging the item securely and dropping it off at the designated shipping location.
so OfferUp's not like picking it up from my house or anything like
No,
that?
not usually. Unless you're using a third-party shipping service that they've partnered with, you're typically responsible for getting the package to the shipping carrier.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the catch? There's got to be a catch.
Well, the key is to be really accurate with the weight and dimensions of your package when you're creating the listing.
Okay.
Because if you get that wrong, you could end up having to pay extra shipping costs, and nobody wants that.
No, absolutely not. And speaking of things you don't want, let's talk about safety because, meeting up with strangers for those local deals can be a little bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah, safety is always a concern when you're dealing with, online marketplaces and meeting people in person.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some tips for, making sure that those transactions are as safe as possible?
Well, first of all, OfferUp has some great features to help with that. Have you heard of their community meetup spots?
I have, but to be honest, I've never actually used one.
So these are designated areas at local businesses, places like police stations or coffee shops that have partnered with OfferUp to provide a safe, well-lit public space for people to meet for these kinds of transactions.
Okay, that's really good to know.
Yeah, it definitely adds a layer of security. But even if you can't find a community meetup spot near you, there are other things you can do. Always choose well-lit public locations for your meetups and try to meet during daylight hours whenever possible. And here's something I always do. I always tell a friend or family member where I'm going, who I'm meeting, and when I expect to be back.
Yeah.
Just as an extra precaution.
That's really smart. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
So we've covered photos, descriptions, pricing, safety, but let's be honest, the real game changer, I think, is negotiation.
Yes.
How do you get better at that? Because, some people are just naturally good negotiators.
Yeah.
And some people, like myself, maybe not so much.
Well, there are definitely some psychological tricks that can make you a more effective negotiator. One that we haven't touched on yet is the power of silence.
Silence? What do you mean? Just not saying anything?
It might sound awkward, but it can be surprisingly effective. When someone makes an offer, try pausing for a few seconds before responding. That silence can create a sense of tension that might lead them to sweeten the deal.
Really?
Yeah, so it's like a little psychological power play.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to have to try that. I'd never done that before.
It's worth a try. It can be surprisingly effective. Sometimes that silence is more powerful than words.
Interesting. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already, from crafting killer listings to negotiating like a pro. But there's one more thing that could really make a difference in your OfferUp success, and that's those 5-star reviews.
Oh, those 5-star reviews are like gold, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And, everybody wants them.
Right.
But how do you consistently get those glowing reviews? What's the secret?
Well, it's more than just providing a good product or service,
Yeah.
right? It's about creating a positive experience for the buyer from start to finish.
Yeah.
Be responsive to messages, answer questions thoroughly, be friendly, be helpful. And sometimes it's about going that extra mile.
Oh, like what? What would be an example of that?
Well, let's say someone buys a vintage record player from you. You could include a handwritten thank you note with their purchase, maybe even suggest a local record store they might enjoy. Those little touches can really make a difference.
Yeah, it's like the little details, the little personal touches
Exactly.
that people remember.
Exactly. It's about building those relationships, creating that positive impression.
Okay, I like that. All right, so now I'm feeling like I'm ready to put all this knowledge into action, but I think we need to get specific. Our source material actually breaks down tips for different categories,
Oh, yeah.
like, furniture, electronics, clothing,
Right.
collectibles. Where do you think we should start?
That's a good question. Let's tackle furniture first. It's a popular category on OfferUp, and there are some specific strategies that can really help you sell those larger items quickly and for the best price.
Okay, furniture it is. So let's imagine I'm finally ready to part ways with that old dresser that's been taking up space in my guest room.
Perfect. Now we're talking.
Where do I even begin?
Well, remember those killer photos we talked about? With furniture, it's not just about good lighting, it's also about showing scale and context.
So no more photos of, like, a lone dresser against a blank wall.
Exactly. Stage the piece in a room setting if possible. Even if it's just a corner of your living room, it helps buyers visualize the dresser in their own space.
That's a good point. It's like virtual staging, almost.
Exactly. Give them a sense of how it would look in a real environment. And don't be afraid to highlight those unique details. Close-ups of interesting hardware, intricate carvings, even those little imperfections that add character.
Oh, yeah, embrace the quirks,
Right.
especially with older pieces.
Exactly. Those imperfections often tell a story, add to the charm. Now, when it comes to the description, be upfront about any flaws, but don't dwell on them. Focus on the positives. Mention things like the type of wood, the construction quality, or any interesting history behind the piece.
Okay, so we've got the visuals and the description down. Now, what about the logistics? Should we offer delivery?
That's a strategic decision. Offering delivery can definitely make your listing more appealing, especially for bulky items like furniture, but it also adds complexity.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you decide?
Well, consider your target market. If you're selling, say, high-end furniture, offering delivery as part of the package might be expected. But if you're selling more affordable pieces, you might want to offer delivery for an additional fee, or leave it up to the buyer to arrange their own transportation.
Okay, so it's all about knowing your audience and finding what works for you. Got it. Furniture's feeling pretty manageable now. Let's move on to another category. Electronics.
All right, electronics. Now, these can be a bit trickier because people are generally more cautious when buying used electronics. Transparency is key here.
Oh, more so than with other categories.
Yeah, I'd say so. Buyers want to know exactly what they're getting, so be upfront about the condition, any known issues, and include lots of detailed photos.
Okay, so lots of photos, be very clear about the condition. What about things like accessories, like chargers, cables, all that stuff?
Ideally, you should include all the original accessories. This adds value and makes the deal more attractive. But if you're missing something, be transparent about it in the description.
Okay, so full transparency is the name of the game when it comes to electronics. Got it. Now let's talk about something that makes me personally a little nervous, and that's selling like a phone or a laptop. I would be so worried about accidentally leaving personal data on the device.
Oh, yeah, that's a valid concern. Before selling any electronic device, make sure you've performed a factory reset. This will wipe all your personal data clean.
Okay, factory reset. Got it. Write that down, everybody.
And be sure to double-check that everything's been erased. You don't want any surprises later. Any other tips for selling electronics?
What else should we know?
Oh, always include the exact model number in your listing. This allows potential buyers to research the specs, compare prices, and make sure it's the right device for their needs. It also helps avoid confusion and ensures a smoother transaction.
Okay, good point. Model number, check. All right, I'm feeling a lot more confident about tackling electronics now. Let's move on to something a bit more fun. Clothing. I love finding, unique pieces on OfferUp. Things you wouldn't find in a regular store.
Yeah, clothing's a great category for both buyers and sellers. But remember, presentation is everything.
Absolutely. So what are your top tips for making those clothing listings stand out?
Think like a stylist. Use a clean, uncluttered background for your photos. Iron or steam the garment to remove any wrinkles. And if you're comfortable, consider modeling the clothing or using a mannequin. It gives buyers a much better sense of how the piece looks and fits.
Okay, so like a mini fashion show on OfferUp. I love it. What about those all-important details like brand, size, and condition?
Be meticulous with those. Include the brand, the size, any relevant measurements, and when describing the condition, be honest. Use terms like new with tags like new, gently used, or shows somewhere. be specific and accurate.
Okay, so honesty is the best fashion policy. Now let's talk about pricing, because clothing can be tricky. How do you value a piece that might be trendy one minute and outdated the next?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Trends come and go so quickly. My advice is to do your research. Check completed listings on OfferUp and other platforms to see what similar items have recently sold for. Consider the brand, the condition, and the current popularity of the style. And remember, be realistic about your pricing.
Okay, so research is key, and be realistic. Fashion trends were fickle. Got it.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about a category that feels a bit more intimidating to me. Collectibles. I always feel like you need to be like an expert to sell those.
Well, collectibles can be a fascinating market, that's for sure. But you don't necessarily have to be an expert to sell them successfully. The key is to know your stuff. Do your research before listing anything.
Okay, what kind of research are we talking about?
Learn about the history of the item, any unique features, its current market value. Check completed listings on OfferUp and other auction sites to see what similar pieces have sold for. You want to be able to answer any questions a potential buyer might have.
So it's like a mini history lesson and a market analysis all in one.
Exactly. Be prepared to answer detailed questions from potential buyers. Collectible buyers are often very passionate and knowledgeable about their niche.
That makes sense. Okay, so know your history, know your market. What about authenticity? How do you prove that, say, your vintage toy or your antique vase is the real deal?
If you have any documentation, like certificates of authenticity, include those in your listing. And high-quality photos are essential here. Capture those details that prove the item's age and origin.
Okay, so authenticity and those detailed photos are key for collectibles.
Got it. Now let's talk about the art of the deal. We've touched on some negotiation tactics already, but are there any specific strategies for selling collectibles?
Well, be patient. Collectibles can take longer to sell than, say, everyday items. Don't be afraid to hold out for the right price, especially if you know the value of your item. And don't be afraid to counteroffer if you think a buyer's offer is too low. Okay, patience is a virtue, especially when it comes to those rare treasures. Got it. So we've covered furniture, electronics, clothing, collectibles. What about those items that don't fit neatly into a category? You know, the miscellaneous stuff that tends to clutter our closets and garages?
Ah, the miscellaneous category. It's a treasure trove of hidden gems. And believe it or not, there's a market for almost everything.
Are you telling me someone out there wants my old waffle iron?
You never know. The key to selling those miscellaneous items is to be creative with your descriptions and highlight any potential uses. Think outside the box.
Okay, so get those creative juices flowing. What are some examples of things that might fall into this catch-all category?
We've got kitchen gadgets, tools, craft supplies, home decor, sporting goods. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, it's like a digital garage sale, almost.
Exactly. And one great tip for making those miscellaneous listings more appealing is to bundle similar items together. For example, if you're selling a bunch of kitchen gadgets, group them together as a starter kitchen set or something like that. This makes the deal more attractive and helps you move multiple items at once.
Bundling. Brilliant. What about those items that might be a bit harder to sell, like old textbooks, outdated technology, things like that?
Don't be afraid to price those to sell. You might not make a fortune, but it's better to declutter and recoup some of your investment than to let those items continue to take up space.
Okay, so price to sell those less desirable items. Got it.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about one of my favorite things about OfferUp, and that's the sense of community. It's not just about buying and selling. It's about connecting with people in your local area. Right?
Absolutely. OfferUp has a real community feel, and that's one of its biggest strengths.
Yeah, for sure. So how can we foster that sense of community and make the most of those local connections?
Well, be responsive to messages, answer questions thoroughly, and engage in polite and respectful communication. Treat your buyers and sellers like neighbors, not just transactions.
Oh, like that. Treat everyone with respect and kindness.
Exactly. It goes a long way.
It's a good rule for life in general, not just OfferUp. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about specific categories, negotiation tactics, safety tips, and even the importance of building community.
We've given our listeners a lot to think about. But remember, the real learning happens when you put these strategies into practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't just listen to the podcast, take action. So before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive into OfferUp, I want to touch on one more thing that can make a big difference in your success, and that's knowing when to use those promote and bump features.
Oh, those are great tools. They can be really useful for getting your listings seen by more people.
Okay, so break it down for us. What's the difference between promote and bump?
So promote essentially gives your listing a paid boost, showing it to a wider audience. It's like a little advertising campaign for your item.
Okay, like a mini billboard for your OfferUp listing.
Yeah, exactly. Bump, on the other hand, simply moves your listing back to the top of the search results, making it appear as if it were newly posted. It's like a refresh button for your listing.
Oh, okay, so it just gives it a little visibility boost.
Exactly. It puts it back in front of potential buyers' eyes.
When should we use these features for maximum impact?
Well, I'd say use promote for high-value items, items in competitive categories, or when you need to sell something quickly. Bump is great for refreshing order listings that have gotten lost in the sea of new postings. Give them a little nudge back to the top.
Okay, so strategic promoting and bumping. Got it. I think we've really covered it all in this first part of our OfferUp deep dive. We talked about creating those killer listings, negotiating like pros, mastering the art of shipping, and even building a sense of community.
And let's not forget about safety. Always prioritize your personal security, whether you're meeting up locally or shipping an item across the country.
Absolutely. Safety first. Now, before we move on to part 2, where we'll dive even deeper into specific strategies for selling different types of items, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question.
Now, getting back to those specific categories for selling on OfferUp, let's start with furniture. It's a popular one, and there are some really effective ways to make sure you get those bigger pieces sold.
Okay, furniture it is.
Yeah.
So picture this. I've got this old dresser in my guest room. It's seen better days,
Okay.
but it's still solid.
Yeah.
It could be great for somebody.
Right.
I'm ready to let it go.
Yeah.
Where do I even start with something like that?
Well, think back to what we talked about earlier. Those photos, those killer photos,
Right.
they're especially important with furniture.
Okay.
You got to show scale, context.
So I shouldn't just take like a photo of the dresser, sitting there by itself against a wall.
Nope. Definitely not. If you can, try to stage it a little bit, even if it's just in a corner of your living room, Give people an idea of how it could look in their own space.
Right. So they can actually picture it in their own home.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to get up close, show those unique details, interesting hardware, any intricate carvings, even those little imperfections,
Yeah.
Those can actually add character.
Yeah. Embrace the quirks, right? Especially if it's an older piece.
Exactly. Those little quirks often tell a story. Now, when you're writing the description, be honest about any flaws,
Okay.
but don't dwell on them. Focus on the positives. Mention the type of wood, the construction quality.
Okay.
Any interesting history behind the piece, if you know it.
Yeah. That's cool. All right. So we've got the photos, we've got the description. What about logistics? Should I offer delivery? I mean, it's a dresser. It's big.
That's a tough one. Offering delivery can definitely make your listing more appealing, especially for larger items, but it can also be a bit of a hassle, right?
Right, for sure.
You got to think about your time, your vehicle, the cost of gas. So it's a strategic decision.
Okay, so how do I decide? What are the factors I should consider?
Well, think about your target market. If you're selling high-end furniture,
Right.
delivery might be like an expected part of the package.
Okay.
But if it's more, affordable pieces, you might want to offer delivery for an extra fee.
Okay.
Or just let the buyer know they're responsible for transportation.
Okay, so it depends on the item and the price point.
Exactly.
And also how much of a hassle I'm willing to deal with.
Exactly right. You got to factor in your own time and effort.
Okay. All right. Furniture's making sense.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to electronics. I feel like that's a whole other beast.
Electronics, yeah. People are always a little more cautious when it comes to buying used electronics.
For sure.
So you really got to be transparent, more so than with other categories, I'd say. People want to know exactly what they're getting. So be upfront about the condition, any issues,
Right.
and lots of photos.
Okay, so really detailed photos, very clear about the condition. What about accessories?
Right.
Like chargers, cables, all that stuff.
Ideally, you should include all the original accessories.
Okay.
That definitely makes your listing more attractive.
Okay.
But if you don't have them,
Right.
just be honest about it in the description.
So full transparency is really important when it comes to electronics.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about something like, say, a phone or a laptop? I would be so paranoid about accidentally leaving like personal data on there.
Right, and you should be. That's definitely something to be aware of. Before you sell any electronic device, make sure you do a factory reset
Okay.
to wipe all your data.
Factory reset. Got it. Any other tips for electronics?
Oh, always include the exact model number in your listing. That way, people can do their own research,
Right.
compare prices, make sure it's the right device for them.
Yeah, that's a good point because sometimes like things look similar, but they're actually different models.
Right.
And they have different features and
Exactly. So having that model number there
Boy.
just eliminates any confusion.
makes things much smoother. All right. I'm feeling a lot less intimidated by electronics now. Let's move on to something a little more fun, maybe. Clothing. I love finding unique clothing items on OfferUp.
Yeah, clothing's a great category. Lots of potential there, but presentation is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are your top tips for making those clothing listings really pop?
Think like a stylist. Use a clean background for your photos.
Okay.
Get rid of any wrinkles. Maybe even model the clothing yourself or use a mannequin
Oh, that's a good idea.
so people can see how it actually looks and fits.
Right, like a little fashion show on OfferUp.
Exactly.
What about all those details, though, like brand, size, condition? I feel like those are really important for clothing.
Absolutely. Be very specific. Include the brand, the size, any relevant measurements. And when you're describing the condition, be honest. Use terms like new with tags, like new, gently used, shows somewhere. Just be clear and accurate.
So honesty is the best fashion policy, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, what about pricing? Clothing can be tough, right?
Yeah.
Because something might be super trendy one minute
Right.
and then like completely out of style the next.
Yeah, trends come and go so quickly. So my advice is do your research. Check completed listings.
Okay.
See what similar items have sold for recently.
Okay.
And consider the brand, the condition, the current popularity of the style. Be realistic with your pricing.
So research is key, okay? Clothing trends are fickle. Got it.
Mm.
All right, now I want to talk about a category that feels a little intimidating to me, to be honest, and that's collectibles. I feel like you need to be like an expert to sell those successful.
Collectibles, yeah. It's definitely a unique market. You don't have to be an expert, but you do need to know your stuff.
Okay, what kind of research are we talking about here?
Learn about the history of the item, any unique features, current market value, check completed listings,
Okay.
see what similar pieces have sold for. You want to be able to answer those detailed questions from potential buyers.
Right, because collectible buyers are usually pretty serious about their hobbies.
Exactly. They're passionate, they know their stuff, so you got to be prepared.
All right, so know your history, know your market.
Mm-hmm.
What about authenticity? How do you prove that, say, your vintage toy or your antique face is the real deal?
If you have any documentation, like certificates of authenticity, include those in your listing.
Okay.
And again, high-quality photos are really important. Capture those details that prove the item's age and origin.
So clear photos and any kind of documentation that you have.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's talk about the art of the deal. We've touched on some negotiation tactics already, but is there anything specific to keep in mind when you're selling collectibles?
Well, be patient.
Yeah.
Collectibles can sometimes take a little longer to sell than, say, everyday items. Don't be afraid to hold out for the right price, especially if you know what you have.
Okay, so patience is a virtue, especially when it comes to those rare treasures. All right, so we've covered furniture, electronics, clothing, collectibles. What about all that stuff that doesn't really fit neatly into a category? You know, the miscellaneous items that tend to pile up in our closets and garages.
The miscellaneous category. It's like a giant online garage sale, right?
Yeah.
And believe it or not, there's a market for almost everything.
So you're telling me someone out there actually wants my, like, old waffle iron?
You never know. The key to selling those miscellaneous items is to be creative with your descriptions.
Okay.
Highlight those potential uses. Think outside the box.
All right, so get creative with it. What are some examples of things that people might actually buy, in this miscellaneous category?
Oh, you've got kitchen gadgets, tools, craft supplies, home decor, sporting goods, like the list goes on and on.
Yeah, it really is like a digital garage sale. So any tips for making those listings more appealing?
One great tip is bundling.
Bundling.
Yeah, so if you're selling, say, a bunch of kitchen gadgets, you can group them together as a starter kitchen set or something like that.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It makes the deal more attractive, helps you get rid of multiple items at once.
Right, because some of those things individually you might not get much for, but bundled together, it's like a whole package.
Right. It's more appealing that way.
Okay, what about those items that are just like kind of hard to sell? Like old textbooks, outdated technology.
Yeah, those can be tough. My advice is don't be afraid to price those to sell.
Okay.
You might not make a fortune, but it's better to declutter and recoup some of your investment than to just have them sitting around taking up space.
Okay, so price those to sell, get them out of there. All right, good advice.
Yep.
Now, I want to talk about something that I really like about OfferUp, and that's the sense of community. It's not just about buying and selling. It's about, connecting with people in your local area.
Yeah, I agree. OfferUp definitely has a more personal feel than some other online marketplaces.
Right. So how can we foster that sense of community? Like, how can we make those local connections, even stronger?
Well, it starts with communication. Be responsive to messages, answer questions thoroughly, and just be polite and respectful.
Right. Treat people how you want to be treated.
Exactly. Treat your buyers and sellers like neighbors, not just transactions.
I like that. Treat them like neighbors.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about specific categories, negotiation tactics, safety tips, even the importance of community building.
Yeah, we've given our listeners a lot to digest. But remember, the real learning happens when you put these strategies into action.
Absolutely. So don't just listen to the podcast. Go out there and try it. Now, before we wrap up this part 2 of our OfferUp deep dive, I want to touch on one last thing that can really make a difference in your success, and that's knowing when to use those promote and bump features.
Oh, yeah. Those can be really helpful tools for getting your listings seen by more people.
Okay, so break it down for us. What's the difference between promote and bump?
So promote is like a paid boost for your listing. It gets shown to a wider audience, kind of like a mini advertising campaign for your item.
Oh, okay. So it's like I'm paying to get my listing in front of more eyeballs.
Exactly. Bump, on the other hand, just moves your listing back to the top of the search results. So it's like hitting the refresh button on your listing, making it look like it was just posted.
Oh, okay. So it gives it a little bit more visibility.
Exactly. It puts it back in front of potential buyers.
All right. So when should we use these features?
Yeah.
Like, when's the best time to promote versus bump?
I would say use promote for high-value items, things in competitive categories, or when you need to sell something quickly. Bump is great for those older listings that have kind of gotten buried under newer postings.
All right, so strategic promoting and bumping. Got it. Now, I think we've really covered it all in this second part of our OfferUp deep dive. We talked about selling furniture, electronics, clothing, collectibles, even those miscellaneous items that we all have cluttering up our homes.
And we talked about some really important stuff like safety and community building.
Right. Remember, folks, OfferUp is more than just an online marketplace. It's a chance to declutter your space, find some unique treasures, and connect with people in your community.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone. Now, in part 3, we're going to put all of this knowledge into practice.
Oh, this is exciting. Get ready, listeners, because we're about to dive into some specific scenarios.
Now that we've covered all those strategies for buying and selling on OfferUp, let's put it all together and imagine some real-life scenarios.
All right, so this is where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. Let's say you're finally ready to part with that old sofa that's been sitting in your basement. You know, the one you've been meaning to get rid of for months.
The one that's been, collecting dust and taking up space.
Exactly. So how would you approach selling that sofa on OfferUp, using all the tips and tricks we've discussed?
Okay, well, first things first. I would make sure I take some really good photos. Remember, good lighting is key, so I try to position the sofa near a window or even take it outside if possible.
Good. Natural light always makes a difference. And remember to stage it a bit. Maybe add a throw pillow or a blanket to make it look inviting.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Make it look cozy.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't just take one photo. I'd take multiple photos from different angles to showcase all the features and the condition of the sofa.
Exactly. Multiple photos are always better than one. Give potential buyers a complete picture.
Now, for the description, I would be honest about the condition of the sofa. If it has any scratches or wear and tear, I wouldn't try to hide that. But I'd also highlight the positives.
Right. Focus on the good stuff.
Like maybe it's super comfy or it's made of high-quality materials. I'd also make sure to include the dimensions so people know if it will fit in their space.
Perfect. Those are all important details that buyers want to know.
Now, for pricing, I'd do some research to see what similar sofas are selling for in my area. And I'd probably start with a slightly higher asking price than I'm actually willing to accept, just to leave some room for negotiation.
That's a smart strategy. Remember that anchoring tactic we talked about?
Exactly. And I'd be prepared to answer any questions potential buyers might have about the sofa, like the age, the brand, the fabric.
Excellent. Be responsive, be helpful, and you'll create a positive experience for potential buyers.
Now, because it's a sofa and it's big, I'd probably offer local pickup only, unless someone was willing to pay extra for delivery.
That makes sense. Delivery for large items can be tricky.
And of course, I'd make sure to meet any potential buyers in a safe public location.
Safety first, always.
So that's how I'd approach selling that old sofa on OfferUp. Using all the strategies we talked about, I think I could find a good new home and make some extra cash in the process.
That's the spirit. And remember, the more you practice these techniques, the more confident and successful you'll become as an OfferUp buyer and seller.
Confidence is key, right? You got to believe in yourself and your listings.
Exactly. So go forth and conquer the OfferUp marketplace.
That's right. And if you're feeling a little stuck or you need some extra inspiration, remember to check out the 1000 Ways to Hustle book. It's packed with even more great tips and ideas.
Absolutely. It's a great resource for anyone looking to make some extra money, whether it's through OfferUp or any other side hustle.
Well, folks, it's been a pleasure diving deep into the world of OfferUp with you today. We've covered everything from crafting killer listings to negotiating like pros, mastering the art of shipping, and even building a sense of community.
It's been a fun journey.
Remember, OfferUp is more than just an online marketplace. It's a platform for sharing, connecting, and even a little bit of hustling.
But let's not forget the most important thing. Stay safe. Whether you're meeting up locally or shipping an item, always trust your gut and take the necessary precautions to protect yourself.
Right on. Now go out there, start listing, start shopping, and most importantly, have fun.
Happy hustling, everyone!
Until next time, keep on diving deep.